Hello everyone, William Cook here, and before completing this week's readings, I have to humbly admit that I was not 100% certain what actually constituted Western civilization. Like many people, I simply associated it with Europe and the United States without giving much thought to where it truly began or what defined it. After this week's readings in the materials, I realized that historians continue to debate that very question, and I found that discussion I found that just as valuable as the historical content itself. One perspective came from Lawrence Berkhan in What is Western Civilization? Berkhan challenges the traditional belief that Western civilization begins with ancient Greece and Rome. Instead, he argues that the new civilization arose in Northwest Europe, suggesting that medieval Europe created something fundamentally different after the collapse of the Roman Empire. According to Berkhan, institutions such as feudalism, new technologies, Germanic traditions made medieval Europe a distinct civilization rather than simply a continuation of the ancient world. At the same time, Robert Royle presents a very different interpretation. In Who Put the West in Western Civilization, rather than seeing the West as a new civilization, Royle describes it as a tradition that developed over centuries. One quote that stood out to me was his statement that a civilization is something we simply inherit is not something we simply inherit or ever finally possess. Each generation individually and collectively needs to make a continual effort to appropriate it anew. I found that idea especially meaningful because it suggests that civilizations are living traditions rather than static historical periods. The third reading that I chose to look at reinforced this broader understanding. It argues that Western civilization is not simply a geographic location, but a tradition rooted in the interaction between classical philosophy and Christianity. Quoting the historian Christopher Dawson, the author writes, "It is impossible to study Christian culture without studying classical culture also." That statement reminded me that whether we begin with Greece, Rome, medieval Europe, the West cannot be understood without recognizing how different intellectual and religious traditions shaped one another. Although these three readings tend to disagree on where Western civilization begins, I do not think they disagree on why it matters. Each author in his own way argues that understanding the West helps us understand the institutions and ideas that continue to shape our world. Concepts such as constitutional government, the rule of law, representative institutions, individual liberty, and human dignity did not emerge overnight. They developed through centuries of debate, adaptation, and historical experience. What I appreciated most was that these readings forced me to move beyond a simple definition of Western civilization. Rather than viewing it as a list of countries or famous historical figures, I can now see it as an ongoing historical conversation. The historians continue to debate its origins, influences, and defining characteristics. And those debates help us better understand not only the past, but also the freedoms and institutions we often take for granted today. In closing, I believe that Western civilization remains relevant, not because it is the only civilization worth studying, but because it provides the historical foundation for many of the political, legal, philosophical, and religious traditions that continue to influence modern society. This week's readings reminded me that history is rarely as simple as we first assume, and sometimes the most valuable lessons comes from not finding one definitive answer, but from understanding why thoughtful historians continue to ask the question. Thank you, and I hope you took something from my presentation.